What is the art of facilitation, and what is it to be the change and the change maker? Well, it's based on the wisdom of famous thought leaders of different civilizations and experiences of working with poor communities that spread to millions of women in India and to countries in Africa. Now, these people have done a residential course on the subject in India for the last 20 years, attended mostly by participants from Europe, but also from Nepal, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa. The presentation and discussion is presented by Varun Vidyarthi, the director of Mana Vodya. So we're going to have a small break and then we'll begin.
Hi, Pete.
Hello there. Hi, Varun. How are you doing?
Fine, fine. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you very clearly.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, would you like to come in at some stage to say something? And at what stage? Maybe shall I invite you to do that sometime?
Yeah, just invite me when you're ready.
Okay, welcome everybody and welcome to the No Labels, No Walls Plus We Are One Festival 2020. My name is Markus Vähälä, hailing not from San Francisco, but from Helsinki, Finland. And I'm so glad that we are here together today to discuss with one of my heroes, Varun Vidyarthi from Mana Vodya from India. We have a lot of time for discussion and we are very excited to hear about Varun's work over the years, which is now spreading all over the world. And I welcome you all to this discussion, and especially Varun. Welcome.
Thank you, Marcus. It is a real pleasure to connect with an evolving group of people who are trying to look at the world in a different light and to bring about change. Because that has been my passion for the last 40 years. Almost since I gave up my job there's something wrong with the presentation. Have you put on the slide? Okay, that's fine. That's fine with me, yes. So it has been 40 years since I have moved into this whole idea of enabling people to change their lives. It has been a wonderful journey and a lot has been achieved. And we'll talk about that. I really feel very strongly that we all can contribute positively towards meaningful change. And it's only when we do that that we'll be able to see effective change. You see, today what I'm going to talk about is how can we bring about this change in steps? Because usually conventionally, everywhere, the governments only deliver goods and services. Now, poverty is something that cannot be removed just by delivering something because it is from multiple causes. And those multiple causes can be very oppressive, they can be quite cruel. And therefore, the whole idea is to enable people to take on their challenge themselves. And we have found that it is possible. But it has to be facilitated. It doesn't happen on its own. And the facilitation process is quite tricky because it involves building new consciousness. It involves building new systems of decision making. It involves building new feeling of strength within communities. All these are complementary and all are needed. And therefore, the facilitator's role is very important. But unfortunately, in this world of development, social change, many of these aspects of facilitation have been lost to so-called management kind of approach, where everything is told from above, and one has to mechanically deliver information or goods and resources. So it's a huge change from the way we do things. And I hope to try and share that with you here today. And towards the end, then we'll talk about what an average citizen can do about it. And I strongly feel that average citizens have a big role. And unless they come forward, we'll not be able to manage the problems of poverty and social injustice through the role of governments or administrators in the corridors of power. What is this? Why do we need this concept of facilitation? You see, I was going through the latest report of the United Nations Human Development Report. It's a very famous report that has been coming out for the last 20 years. And that report clearly states that in every country, mark the word, in every country, many people will have little prospect for a better future. Lacking hope, purpose, or dignity, they will watch from society's sidelines and see others pull ahead to even greater prosperity. This is quite an understatement in terms of my experience, because the kind of life people are leading in a very large number of countries and a significant population, it is full of grim, misery and hopelessness as a way of life, which leads to several social tensions and violence in different forms within family, outside families, which are usually not captured by media. And therefore, it's very important to intervene in some manner. We cannot leave this process in the hands of politicians, because the process has to be facilitated. And it can be done on a large scale. We have done it on a large scale. Now, I say this with conviction because we have actually been working for almost 30 years and trained several thousand facilitators of change in this process, who themselves have in turn contributed beautifully. So it's a process that can be replicated, it can be scaled up. But what is this concept of facilitation? How is it different from management? You see, in management, usually the manager has control over this situation. He or she takes decisions. But in facilitation, people are enabled to take control. They take decisions. So it's a totally different way of doing things. And because poverty is not due to just one or two reasons, it is because of multiple factors. The whole idea of facilitation has to be very human. You understand when I say human? It cannot be a mechanical process of just giving something, because it starts by establishment of trusting relationships. Usually the people who become very poor, they lose trust in other people, especially those who are coming from outside to help or guide them. Because usually it leads to, a totally kind of exploitative relationships, even if people are coming to help them. One has to see to believe it. So building of trusting relationships implies a very human approach. And whereas in our world today, we are gradually getting trained to be very smart, aggressive, and competitive. All these things are opposite to being human. So therefore, to build a capacity of a facilitator, we have to gradually build self-awareness, absence of bias or prejudices, humility to learn from people. This is what is, we call it a new paradigm of development from within. And therefore, in this, the person who's trying to facilitate has to be willing to change himself or herself too. So this is the new paradigm. If we really want to be a change maker, if we want to really bring change, we must be willing to change ourselves. This is the new paradigm, and it works. It works on a large scale. And this is something that we need to promote, we need to take forward everywhere, because this equation is very human. And wherever there is humanity, it can be taken forward. Now, what is this human touch? I've tried to explore this in the context of what I learned from, the Indian context, but also from the Western traditions. We are having rich, our humanity is rich with huge kind of gems of, statements, learnings, understandings coming from over history, right down to the present century. We have missed a lot of it, but I would just like to point out some that I picked up from both the civilizations, Western civilizations, Eastern civilizations. And when I say Eastern civilizations, I mean Chinese civilization, not the current Chinese, which has totally drifted from their own ways of thinking. They've put 75% people who were living in rural areas in China are now reduced to 25%. Imagine the state of what is happening in China today. It's just terrible. Putting 75% population living in rural areas to leaving that to just 25% living in ghettos in Beijing or whatever. So we are not talking of that civilization. The old ancient Chinese civilization was very rich, and it had people, you must have heard of names, Confucius, Lao Tzu. Wonderful. Their understanding of life, their statements, even people today are following those traditions even today. So I picked up many of those things from that civilization. The Indian civilization is so rich. Many of the Western people in the West have not even been able to come very close to it. Right from the time of 1,000 years or several thousand years before Christ, we had these Vedas. And then much after that, even 500 years before Christ, we had huge, very well-known saint philosophers like Patanjali, later Buddha, and then much later here towards this last century, in fact, we had people like Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo. These names will start shining even 100 years from now because they talked of methods of evolution. So it is something that we all need to study. After all, what is life? How can it be contributed in a way that it leads to positive change? So we have been studying all that, especially to understand what is it that is the human aspect of living and how can we use that for facilitation? Because facilitation implies having a human touch. And it's very simple. See, for example, all the civilizations have talked of very simple things. Things like kindness, compassion, attitude of giving. This is something that we have towards others. What are the attitudes that we have for ourselves? Patience, humility, simplicity. Many people, believe me, many people, saint philosophers of different civilizations have stressed on this aspect of patience, humility, simplicity in life. And you can all see that as a society, world over, we are actually moving away from such parameters. We are moving away from being kind, from being compassionate, from the whole idea of giving. And when we go deeper, in fact, when we go deeper in exploring what these civilizational leaders have said, they've all talked of purposive living, living for a purpose. Socrates from Greece, he mentioned that a life which is not examined is not worth living. An unexamined life is not worth living. So the purposive living, we need to have a purpose. I remember a kind of a survey carried out somewhere in Europe about a few years back, where they found that almost 60% of the people who were in jobs didn't like their jobs. They were simply doing it for the sake of making a living. They didn't like the jobs. They had lost purpose in life. Everything was there for just making some money, making a livelihood. I'm talking of in the West, in India, and many Southern Asian countries or Africa, that is the rule. But having a purpose, purposive living, knowing oneself, every civilization has talked of the real goal of life is to know oneself, what we are really. Are we just this flesh and blood? Or are we just emotions? Are we just the mind? Or is it something else? And there is so much literature on this, something that we can really learn from in a very easy context. It is not something which can be done in a very difficult manner. It is all something very simple. Growing in consciousness. What is this consciousness? Yesterday, I was having a dialogue with the students of Lucknow University. And they even asked me simple question like, what is morality? Should we be moral? Now, some basic questions on the human aspect of living is something that we'll have to bring back into our discourse, whether it is through the citizen network or through some other means of NGOs. We cannot be just mechanically guided by the way in which the world is pushing us. It has to have a purpose behind, a purpose of living and some kind of a compassion and growing in consciousness, because ultimately, unless we grow in consciousness, we are always going to get diverted from our path. The television program, the social media is always pushing us in all kinds of different directions. Now, we are not going into details here, but I just wanted to stress that these are not something abstract. It is just that because of our focus on competition, on material growth, that we are losing our whole idea of being human. We have to get back to humanity. And our citizens movement should take steps to bring this into focus again. Now, it is interesting that in Manvodaya, Manvodaya literally means, it's a Sanskrit word. It means human awakening. Human awakening. So if you translate it into Sanskrit, it means Manavodaya. We have been working on this very aspect of human awakening for last 35 years. We had set up Manvodaya in 1985. Before that, I was trained as an engineer. I am a Pakka engineer. They say, I designed electric vehicles way back in 76. And I got a national award for designing electric vehicles. 76. And I was working as an engineer in a big multinational company manufacturing heavy vehicles. Comfortable life, lot of money, lot of respect. Why did I choose to abandon that? To come into a field connecting with people? Simply because, the whole literature of change and development is full of beautiful statements. I read a book from a person called Swami Vivekananda, and he mentioned, he's a wonderful orator. He has spoken all over the world, way back in the 19th century. Just happened to read one of his books. I suggest everybody should read Vivekananda. Wonderful. He's so simple to read and comes out with original thoughts, very powerful. So he said, and I was just 21 at the time, successful engineer in a big company. He said that I will hold every person, so long as there are millions of people living in poverty, I hold every person a traitor who, having been educated at their expense, does not care for them. So that statement shook me really. And I had to resign. and I didn't know what to do. Started living and working in villages, and it is now 40 years since then. But what I want to say is that a purposive living, a focus, compassion has to be brought back into our discourse. We are losing that discourse. The current day students everywhere in the world, including India, Africa, are more towards aggressive salesmanship, being smart, competition. We are losing that human touch. We have to bring this back. So in Manavodaya, we decided to bring that back in a practical context, in working with communities. And that is where, it's a long story. I'll be sharing some of that story on the 19th, because it's a kind of a bibliographical sharing of story on the 19th. But while working with communities, we realized that the current trend in development and social change is to just give from outside. Governments just give some grants, goods and services. Donor agencies come, they are giving some house somewhere, a road somewhere, a hand pump somewhere. It's just giving and giving and giving. Now that creates a lot of dependency. Therefore, what we have to do is to enable people to take charge of their life themselves. That has to be the key. We understood this long back, 30 years back, and started focusing our work just on this aspect. How do we enable people? But unless we do that, we are going around in circles. A donor has come, has paid something. When the money is gone, people go back to the old ways. Unless a new paradigm is created through which people are able to work it out on their own. Having focused on that aspect, it took a long time, but we were successful in creating these systems. We call them systems now, systems of self-management of people. It has different components. Systems of consciousness. How do we people agree and understand that it's not about money only? It's about a whole set of circumstances on which, if they work collectively, then they'll be able to pull themselves out. It is not something that a person can do individually. People live in terrible circumstances. Believe me, it is very difficult to understand from outside. Even an average urban Indian does not understand poverty because they have never tried to visit the poorer areas of the country, the rural areas of the country. It is a fashion to just live like a Western, style, having nice cars or vehicles and computer, nice clothes and Nike shoes, and that's the modern trend. Even a young mind does not want to connect back to its own people. So that's a very dangerous trend, really. And therefore, it's very difficult to find people who are willing to go back to the roots and facilitate this change among people to say that, no, we can do it. You can do it. You have the power. It's all about a process of collecting together, understanding the circumstances, and picking up this method of facilitation that we'll talk about. We called it self-help, that grew into a movement, and now it has changed the lives of millions of people. So this is something possible. We need to do it everywhere, but we need to create these facilitators of change. We need to identify them. We need to train them. So let's hope we are able to move steps ahead in this presentation to share that this is possible. Okay, now we'll have some of the presentations from the PowerPoint. Can I have the PowerPoint?
Yes, it's on, Varun.
Yes, you can change. You come to the 5th or 6th slide where now it is mentioned about. So we've touched on these aspects. Next slide, even next. Yeah, next again. Yes, now we'll talk about self-help groups. How do we facilitate awareness? How do we create systems? How do we create strength? And in India, self-help groups were identified with credit mechanism, how to give credit. Because in Bangladesh, they had started this credit movement. It's called the microcredit, movement. And India, the self-help group started being seen as a credit movement, and therefore everything started being connected to money only, which is fine. But they lost the whole sense of consciousness, of strength, of doing things together. That was lost to just the monetary aspect. But when we had started this whole thing, it was on a different note altogether. If you can see the next slide. What is this context of misery? See, what happens when a person is very poor? There are oppressive relationships within a family. A man usually gets drunk, comes back in the afternoon, beats the wife. So domestic violence tends to be a very terrible state of affairs in a large number of families. That is within the family. Outside the family, even if you don't say it, but a lot of people have these feudal mindsets. Feudal mindsets is a kind of a mindset where a person thinks that I am superior to the other person. So this comes from a background of being rich, also comes in India and many other countries because some ethnic features. Like in India, some castes feel that they are superior. Similar to maybe in some other places, where it comes with the form of race, for example. So this feudal mindset, it's very difficult when there is a feudal mindset. It's difficult for the poorer people to come out of it unless they're able to, challenge that system and begin to feel that yes, together it is possible. And these self-help groups were actually created to enable people to come out of that, feeling of being very low in the community because of low ethnic background, because of poor economic status, or especially women, in fact, because women are the poorest, because in a family, the man may be using all the money for his own purpose, giving very little to the woman. So a lot of things happen by empowering women. This self-help group phenomena, and I feel this is something that is happening world over. The woman in the family has to be empowered to be able to take decisions and to move forward through their own social enterprise, social and economic enterprise. So this is the context of misery. Of course, the supporting institutions that the governments have made, the police, the land records, nothing tends to support the poor person. Everything seems to be supporting the better off. So that is the context of misery and hopelessness that the poor people feel. And I've seen this happening not just in our country, but I've traveled to many countries in South Asia and Africa. The situation seems to be pretty same everywhere. So it is a multiple context. Now, what happens when average, the normal way, when, please see the next slide, please. A donor, a program of change, of development, organized by the government or some donors, they are usually giving. That creates a dependency syndrome in the idea of a poor person. That person always wants, okay, if there's a donor, something happening, oh, I am so poor, please give me something. This whole mindset makes them poor for life. We have to gradually enable them to move out of this mindset. Believe me, this is possible. We have done this not only in India, we've done this in a major way in African countries. Once we were invited to the country Tigray. Tigray recently achieved independence from Ethiopia, and most of the fighters were women, the women fighters. Once they achieved independence from Ethiopia, it was such a poor country, they didn't know what to do. So we were invited there to speak to many of these women fighters to get their life back in shape. A lot of them had come from far off. And when we started this discussion on self-help, and when we explained to them that they don't need anyone, together they can do it. Now, by the end of 6 days, we were all crying. They said, I thought that my life, I'm not able to do anything, but now I realize I can do it. This feeling of I can do it is the basic. We have to find facilitators who can create such feelings, sit with them, communicate with them as a fellow human being, having that right human touch. And believe me, people understand. They are people, they have the same kind of understanding knowledge, intellect that we people who are studied have. Even poor people have the same. It's just that they live in misery and they lose hope. But once we sit with them, have a nice chat, they start understanding and they get back to life. And that is what brings a change in life. It doesn't come by giving money, it has to be facilitated. This is something that we have to understand. And that is why the need to create facilitators of change, to bring a vision that what is it that I am trying to do? It is not just giving money. It's about enabling that people to understand that they can do it together themselves, and then to handhold with them, see it through. So this is something that we have to move people away from, the dependency syndrome that is filled up in their minds, that if somebody has to come and give us something, only then we'll be relieved. No, together we can do it. This is a feeling that has to be created. Okay, next slide. You know, this South American writer called Paulo Freire, he talked of this several decades back and he called it conscientization. Conscientization really means that people understand their current living situation, they analyze it, and they also analyze how to move forward. So he gave the name conscientization. Many of you must have heard of this famous book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. But that is not enough. It's just about understanding. It's also about understanding one's own family situation, one's own, personal situation. We are, sometimes in a mess. We can't think. That poor person can't think. When I say that, you must understand that this is true. Let me give you an example. I'm a very poor woman. My son is ill. So I have to take my son to a hospital. I don't have cash. So I borrow some money from a local money lender, a powerful elite. Now, in many cases, I can just give you one story. Let us say I have borrowed just about 200 rupees. 200 rupees is just like $3 or $4. But by borrowing those 200 rupees, that person is giving it to me at a very high interest rate, which is usually around 10% per month. Now, 10% per month, when we compound it, it becomes an unimaginable figure. So once that figure keeps growing, imagine 200 rupees per month. Just see if that woman doesn't pay it for a few years, what does that amount become? Turns into thousands. And that if that person doesn't have the money to pay back, the person has to sell off the land. This is something which is happening in a subtle manner. And the person loses whole track how to think. Therefore, this whole idea of facilitation is about enabling people to bring their voice back, enabling them to think again as human beings. And it is possible. So it has to go beyond conscientization into a feeling of growing consciousness that yes, together, this strength, we have to lose our fears. We have to become free again. We have to lose our biases. We have to lose our prejudices and, build up the positive aspect of life. That is what I call consciousness growing. Build on the positives. Nowadays, people give it new words. If somebody calls it appreciative inquiry, whatever name it is, people must gradually start being aware of their strengths. And this is a very important component of facilitation. If it is not done just by throwing money, it doesn't help. Okay, next slide. There is a trick behind a feeling of collective strength. There's a very strong trick. And this is again what a facilitator has to do. You see, when we are entering into one particular area, even in the Western context, there is no community as such. There are people with different interests. So even in India, for example, there are people of different castes. There are people with different professions. Now, the trick here is, in enabling strength, is to enable a group which is homogeneous in nature. Homogeneous means people who are friendly among themselves, who have the same kind of stakes, who have the same kind of a living situation. We enable them to work as a group. We can't put everyone together in one group. So if we have a homogeneous group, it works very well for a long time because people there are friendly. They know each other's background. So the first important difference in trying to move towards a position of strength or to facilitate that strength is to identify and enable homogeneous groups, people who are willing to sit together and talk as equals. This is different from cooperatives. In our countries, everywhere in the world, there are cooperatives, but cooperatives have people who are both rich and poor. They can both be put into the same context. But in a self-help group, people must be from a homogeneous context, and it works beautifully then because people are able to talk it out among themselves. They begin to have a voice. They can say what they feel like in their group. So the first principle of having a collective strength is to be the homogeneous principle. It's very important to understand. The second thing is build some economic stakes. See, people can come together. People come together for different reasons. People come together to a protest. There are thousands of reasons for which people come together. But then they collapse again. Everybody has interests. They go back to their own ways. But if you are able to build economic stakes by having people to put some very small amount of money on a regular basis in some common pool, let's say just 10 cents or 10 rupees or 50 rupees, all collected in one common pool, everybody is contributing towards it, then there are some stakes built into it. So that people are going to come every month now. They're going to have a discussion on how to use that money, how to go forward. This putting in of economic stakes is something very fundamental that many of our societies who are trying to bring about change have lost. We have to bring this idea of having economic stakes into any institutional setup of the poor. This amount can be very small and it can be and should be decided by people themselves. Should not come from the facilitator from outside. So building economic stakes is very fundamental to feeling of collective strength. Then it also implies new leadership, because conventional leadership has always seen the world in a different light. When people get empowered, when women get empowered, usually a new leadership emerges, because that is seeing things, everything in a different context altogether. And we must allow new leadership to emerge through a lot of discussions, dialogue among people. Now, it is a whole way in which it's very human, and we see organic leadership emerging from that. And that is the beauty. So new leadership, people have to understand that it's also about funds management. How do we collectively manage funds? We all manage funds individually in a family. But very poor families who have very little resources, they have never managed funds collectively. So it's about funds management also, and all about collective decision making. Now let me tell you that collective decision making is not a simple exercise. It has to be based on what people feel is in what they can come together for. I can give you 100 examples because I've been through this now for years and years together. The facilitator has to sit with them peacefully for a long time and understand what is it on their mind that can bring them together. Once, coming back to this Ethiopian example, when I was in this Ethiopia, there was this group of women who had come to train. I asked them, what are we trying to achieve today? What is it that we want from life? Everybody had different answers. So I said, how can we move forward with different people having different visions, how do we move forward? We would like to have everyone, is there something common that we all want? They couldn't find an answer. So I said, okay, I'm here all the way from several thousand kilometers away, but we have to find a common purpose. So we leave you for the night. Tomorrow morning, let us see if we can find a common purpose. Debate about it at night. So they all went back home, wherever they were living, and had a long debate on what is it that we want to achieve in our life. They were all very poor. What do they want? Next morning, when we met, they all had a very clear, defined purpose, absolutely clear. And I was so happy because that led to some mechanism in which they could take decisions together. That was the whole idea. Can you imagine what they would have said? What is it that they want to achieve in life? They were all very poor women. Well, they all said that our life, we are now in our 50s, we have fought our freedom struggle. We want our children to be happy, and we can all die for it. Common vision. It was very clear that they are willing to die for something together. So that gave them this collective strength. That gave it this feeling of being together for a common purpose. That is something that we all have to achieve when we sit with people, in different circumstances. They have to try and achieve a common vision so that they can come together and feel a sense of being together. So this collective decision making, being together, being a collective, also implies facilitation. This is what I want to say. It does not happen automatically. It implies facilitation again. Facilitation also implies linkages with the outside world. The outside world means the regular government, the banks, the whole machinery of administration around us, different departments. These people must have a relationship that is built on their strength now, because now they know that they are not going to look up to them for everything. They now have a bargaining power and they can have a new relationship with the outside world. This is again what needs to be facilitated. Building up a new relationship with the outside world, whatever that world is. It could be the bank, it could be the government machinery, it could be various departments, it could be anything. It could be the market, in fact. Because a single person trying to sell goods or grains will find it very difficult to get the right price. But a group of people selling their goods or grains will be able to get the right price. So, it's a totally new relationship that evolves. Once there is an empowered group, they are able to build new relationships. And this also has to be facilitated. So, I just wanted to say here that this context of facilitation is, we talked about higher consciousness, but this idea of collective strength is something that needs to be facilitated. And a facilitator must understand that this is the role, and we have to train the facilitator to do that. This is something that is not happening. It is not happening for many reasons. One of the main reasons is that most people who are educated, who can act as good facilitators, do not want to go back to the communities because the living conditions of there are very poor. That it's very challenging to live and work among them. People don't want to listen to you. So we have to build a trusting relationship with them first. And it's not easy, but it is still possible. It is still possible. There are ways to do that. We are having courses to enable people to understand and do that. But it's not possible to share it in a 1-hour discussion. But I just wanted to indicate that these things are possible. They're very scientific, and it is happening on a large scale already. But it's not large enough. We have to take these things forward because millions are living in poverty all over the world even today. Next slide, please. What are these systems that we need to create or enable people to work on? I'm calling them systems because this is something that people have to work on themselves. They have to manage it themselves. They have to start owning it. What usually happens, this is what is important. When an outside agency comes to work with very poor people, systems are created and managed by the outside agency. That is not very helpful because once the agency withdraws, the systems collapse. Therefore, we have to enable people to build their own systems, which they can manage themselves without any external assistance. So now we'll call these systems of cash management. I don't want to go into detail here, but it's a very simple process, but in any case, it has to be facilitated. It doesn't happen on its own. Cash management in a group. How do poor, illiterate women who are illiterate, they can manage cash. It is a method. It can be done on a large scale. And it's not automatic, believe me, it doesn't happen on its own. Just to manage cash collectively, it's a process. Simply also accounts management. Illiterate women, how do they manage accounts? We have a process. The process is very simple. Identify somebody who is a little trained, who's good at maths. We train that person to write simple accounts. The accounting system can be, simplified. Our conventional accounting systems tends to be very complex. We have several books, cash books, ledger, trial balance. All that can be simplified, demystified, and a class 5 or a class 8 student can actually write it in a very simple form. So that has to be then, we have to share the simplified books, train some persons to, write people's accounts. Accounts is something very fundamental. It's like the backbone of a group or a community. Because unless people are sure that their money is safe, people will not have faith in their own group. So accounting systems they have to be necessarily very transparent, and the system has to be, whoever is in charge must be accountable. They need for very strong accounting systems in any group exercise. Believe me, I've traveled to many parts of the world. In India, I find accounting systems the weakest link, the poorest conditions, almost everywhere. Accounting systems have to be strengthened everywhere, again, by demystifying, simplifying accounting procedures, and it is possible. Again, it has to be facilitated. It does not happen on its own. Again, let us come to credit management. Credit management implies, here we are now talking into the microcredit phenomena. Now, in this, it's very interesting because I have participants here listening from different countries and in different contexts. Microcredit has become a very, very well-known phenomena because of this famous person, Muhammad Yunus of Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. Now, the microcredit phenomena of Bangladesh is very different from the Indian self-help phenomenon. Because Bangladesh microcredit depends on funds coming from outside the world, outside their country. It is something that is to be brought in. Whereas in a self-help context, people are saving their own, they create their own resources by pooled savings. So it is totally different from the microcredit phenomena that is spreading all over the world, which is dependent on outside resources. Here we are talking of self-help. People create their own resources by pooling in something of their own little saving, even if that is very small, but it is their own. And that is what creates that ownership. And it is a totally different thing. Once people have this small kitty, even if it is very small, that can be used to attract funds from the banks. Because banks always want some kind of a collateral, some kind of a security through which they are sure that their money will come back. So once these poor people have a small kitty, their own funds, banks will be willing to lend to them. This is very important. Rather than having a microcredit mechanism through which some outside agency gives income funds, a phenomenon of self-help implies that we start with our own funds, build our own decision-making mechanism, build our own cash management, build our own accounts management, and then go ahead and ask for funds from the bank or whatever agency. It creates a very strong sense of power and self-esteem. So the whole idea of credit management is also very important. Idea of audit. Again, if you are having any accounting system, it must have an audit system. Now, I'm not going to go into details here, but I can tell you that it can be facilitated. It can be done very well. It can be done very professionally, even by very poor people. The whole idea of telling all this is to say that facilitation is something very scientific. It is something that works. It is something that people can own gradually. It can change their lives, and it can change their lives totally. But we need to create such facilitation mechanisms. It is not going to happen on its own. That there's need for a mechanism to take this forward. The different aspects that I mentioned, this was just the self-management aspect. Okay, next slide, please. Once the women, they understand that 10 or 15 of them sitting together, working together, they can change their life, they start speaking up. Believe me, they start speaking up. And their voice can then be heard. They don't allow any kind of suppression, oppression of any kind. I've come to believe from our experience, 10 women together are very powerful, very powerful. Their tenacity, it can shake a government, it can shake any system. The whole idea is that once they find their voice, once they understand that they can do things, once they have this right leadership with them, it brings about real change in their lives. You have to see it to believe it. We have been giving training programs to people in government, in banks, to scholars, to various international scholars. We have been doing that for the last 25 years. And when we take them to the field to make them see it with their own eyes, they don't believe it. The woman who was in total misery, she's not looking up to these visitors for any help. In fact, they are happy to come forward and talk as equals. So this gives them this voice. This is what social and economic empowerment is all about. These are not just words. These have to be really felt. And women live their lives. They empower themselves. No longer domestic violence is out of question. It goes away from the families because women have found their voice. The very important thing is that it leads to good governance. Now, this is something very fundamental. What is bad governance? The police, let us say, the land record system, the rationing system, the infrastructure for education, for health. Can you see my face, Marcus? Okay.
Yes, we can.
There are so many systems at the village level promoting health, promoting education, promoting good governance in land management. When the people are disempowered, when just a few people who are elite, who are rich, they have control, then the entire governance system collapses. So even if a government comes in with some money and resources, it goes into the wrong hands. You understand? And therefore, good governance is the key to good life. It does not happen automatically in societies, in poor countries. I am not sure about the high income countries. I'm sure it happens there too in a subtle manner. But here it is very direct. So, but when groups of women get empowered, they sit together, they create a federation, their voices are now heard, and the systems of governance improve automatically. They improve automatically because they start fearing that if I don't do this, women are going to, come together and create, a commotion in our office. So improved governance is a very important aspect of, again, gradually building up women to start talking about the problems that they face in daily lives, where they should come together and put things together and work together to see that whatever institutions exist, the health institutions, the educational institutions, they work in the right manner. So improved governance is a very important aspect that emerges as a very important aspect of self-help, again, which needs to be facilitated. It doesn't happen on its own. There's so many aspects to this. Let's go on to the next slide. So this will give you, I want to just share some examples of how does this actually happen. Because these are not just words, these change the lives of people in millions. We are talking of millions now. How does it happen? So this is one example. I'll just read through this. You can read through this. This person's name is Muhammad Khalil. He has no land. He earlier worked as a wage laborer. Wage laborer, you go out to sell your labor. So we gradually enabled him to start a small group, join a group, self-help group. This was a men's group. Usually we have women's group, but this is an example of a men's group. 90% of the groups that are formed are women's groups. But here, this is an example of a men's group also. So we encouraged him to form a self-help group together with his friends, 10 people. They saved some money and gradually lent some money to themselves, kept their accounting systems. And when everything was in order, it takes a few months before things are in order. They approached the bank for some funds and they got some money from the bank also. The bank lent them some funds. Now, he borrowed money from his group, not from the bank. The group borrows money from the bank and the individual members borrow money from the group. So this person initially borrowed rupees 2,000 from his group to buy all these, beauty ornaments, all the bangles and things that women wear, started selling them, put them in a small box, and started selling them from house to house. That was very successful. Everybody wanted to have bangles and everybody at the village level. So next time he took a higher loan from his own group. He took a loan of 12,000 this time. And now he's become a successful business. So starting small, this is again another beauty in self-help groups. One starts small. Why? Because the capacity to take risk, mark my words, the capacity to take risks, economic risks in the life of a poor person is small. A poor person cannot take big risks. And in a self-help group, a person starts with small loans taken from the group itself. So it's not a very big risk. One learns to, take risk. One learns to handle money. One learns to do small business and gradually build confidence to take on more loans, bigger loans. So this person first took a small loan, 2,000, built confidence, took a loan of 12,000. Next time he'll be taking a loan of 80,000. That's how gradually people pick up strength to take risk. And over years, they move out of poverty totally from their own efforts, through their own group, through their own savings, through their own decision-making mechanism, through their own accounting system, through their group being able to borrow from the bank. And he is now earning, at that time when we talked to him, this was almost 15 years back, his sales was up to 1,000 rupees a day, which was very good. If he was having usually in this business, they have 50% kind of a margin of profit. So making 500 rupees per day is a huge, kind of a margin for a poor person in the Indian context. Okay, so we'll see the next page. Another small example. There are thousands of such examples. Thousands. We are not talking of 1, 2, 10, 100. There are thousands of such examples. Again, just from one organization like ours, we have been training thousands of organizations in these methods, and they in turn have created thousands. So that is how the thing grows. Once we create systems, we enable people to follow those systems, and it just grows. Next slide, please. I've taken this example out of thousands because this boy had polio. Now, I find quite shocking that in the Western world, when we are talking of disabilities, people are having millions of dollars or pounds coming in for their support. Millions. Here, there's nothing coming in. So how do we bring a change in the lives of people? We enable this boy to join a self-help group. If you can read through this small description, see, his name is Kamlesh. He has polio in both his legs and early in life. So we enabled him to join a self-help group. Again, through this long discussion, consciousness raising, it's a long process. So then from this group, he takes a small loan of rupees 3,000 and he starts a very small shop. You can see it's a small shop, just like a small 6 foot by 3 foot, a small wooden shop where he keeps small little things. Tobacco, some small odd things that poor people buy. And he sells very little, just about 150 rupees a day. But at least he's built confidence that I can do things. He is not anymore dependent on anyone. When I met him last time, almost 10 years back, he was a confident person. His shop has grown many times. He was living an independent life. And he told me so many things, that he has purchased a television and he likes to watch films. A person whose life was crushed because of polio grew in confidence because of this self-help group. Takes a small loan. It's not just the loan, it's the whole group mechanism, the building of strength, the building of feeling that we can do it, that matters. And that comes through this self-help mechanism. It has to be facilitated. So I just took these two examples out of thousands to show that it really works. It works on a large scale. And it works even in the case of disabled persons. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Again, this is a meeting that we conducted. These are in 2 different districts where we had trained non-governmental organizations from different districts who had come to us for getting trained in this method. So we had gone to those organizations who in turn had created several hundred groups in their district. So since we were their kind of mentors, we had trained them and we went there and we wanted to connect to the women there directly. So these were meetings of these many self-help groups which had come together. So we shared this whole idea of solidarity, of being able to do things together, to shake off this idea of that we are dependent on somebody, to be able to, have improved governance of local institutions. It requires a collective understanding that we can do it. So this is what we sometimes do. Go over to, to meetings of different places, people who have been trained with us, go over to their groups. You can see almost 1,000 women sitting from many groups. And together we start discussing, after all, why these groups? Why have we done this? What is the larger purpose? Is there something that we can do collectively? Is there anything that has not been resolved? So it is something that really works, and it can work in all situations. And in India, we are so proud. We don't feel responsible. But the group mechanism has spread to 10 million groups, 100 million families. It's unimaginable. Things spread because systems have been created. Banks have come forward to support it. We have had an excellent institution. The Apex Bank has come forward with policies which says that every bank has a mandate to give loans to groups. Even the government has come with so many schemes to create people's groups. This is something that has happened. Unfortunately, many things have not happened. The systems, the accounting systems are not very transparent. The consciousness element has not been very strong. So groups have expanded on a large scale, but the facilitation process has been weak. And that is what needs to be put back on track. That is what needs to be done. And that's what we need, good facilitation again. We are again going back to identify good local facilitators, support them to start working back on the core principles of facilitation again. Because despite the scaling up, the core principles, the human touch has been lost. That has to be brought back. And this can go to any country. We first need to have good facilitators, train them well, train them in the human aspect as well, train them in the systems aspect, in the governance aspect, and things move. People take charge of their life themselves, but we need to facilitate the process. So here are some visuals to enable you to understand that people come together and make things happen. Here, there's no need for an outside administrator in the government to come and people to say that you are going to do this. People here say, we are going to do this. So this is a total reversal of roles. And this is what we are very happy and proud about. This is something that can be shared across the world. Okay, next slide. Just a slide to show you that we are so happy to meet these strong women fighters from Tigray. All these women had gun in their hands before we met them. After winning their independence from Ethiopia, such a poor country, they didn't know what to do. And my goodness, after the first round of discussion we had very long discussion, right? Early morning to late evening. And these women felt, they were very strong women. They started feeling that, yes, we can do it now. This feeling of we can do it is life, is the key to change. We have to bring back life into people. It can be facilitated. Friends, it can be facilitated. We're so proud of this. This is the photograph just to show that it can be done. Okay, next slide. Again, this is another place in Ethiopia. It's a place called Logia, a very small town. These are NGOs which work in that area. It's called the Afar region. Afar, A-F-A-R, Afar region. I think it is one of the poorest regions in the world. I find it, nothing grows there. There's no agriculture. There are no resources. It's terrible. People move from one place to the other on camels. And I have not seen a poorer place like this. There are NGOs that are working in that region. And we went there and we stayed there for a week. And we shared the same concept with them. That even if life is very poor, people can change life themselves. It was not easy for us. We lived a difficult life there also. We lived, in bamboo houses. It was difficult for us. But the whole idea of facilitation is to live with them, is to, create that human touch. We need facilitators who can create that human touch. But that is what communicates. Money does not communicate. The human touch communicates. There are many regions in the world which are very poor. Next slide, please. We have been trying to share such awareness in many rich countries. I've tried to sell the idea to a Norwegian. This is a meeting held in Norway. A group called Fredskorpset. It's kind of Peace Corps. Again, the whole idea of enabling them to understand that self-help works. We need to have a different approach to change. So long our ways of change is to donate, to give something. Giving does not help. We have to identify local facilitators. We have to train them. We have to build the human touch, and things start working. So these are people coming from several countries in Middle East, Africa. This was in Oslo. But somehow, even facilitators need resources. Facilitators have to be trained. It has to be good training. They have to be supported because they'll be giving their life. So we have to support them again with funds. So this needs some kind of a scaling up, identifying resources to pay facilitators, to train them, and then to continually guide them, to mentor them. It's a different exercise altogether. So it's a paradigm shift. It's a new way of doing things. We have been trying to share this with people across the world. The Manvoda chapter in England, they enabled me to talk to the British Parliament also. We went there with Pete Richmond. He's there in the group watching this. But unfortunately, there was a whip issue to the Parliament and they all could not come. We need to take this to policymakers. We need to take this idea to philanthropists. We need to take this idea to donors to have a different approach. And that approach is not about money. It is about bringing in the human touch. How do we bring in that human touch? We'll talk about this now. Please change of slides again. We call this reflective learning. It's not about giving information. It's not about sharing information. It's about reflection. What do we reflect on? You can change slide here. We have to bring this into our educational system itself. Our education is based on just mechanical sharing of information. The reflection is a very important aspect of life. Deep reflection. What is it that I am doing? Why am I doing it? Many people live their life very mechanically. And I'm not talking of the West where people are living an easy life. I'm talking of many people, especially in South Asian countries, African countries, even many social workers in the West. It's a very mechanical way of doing things, taking orders from the top and simply delivering them down. A very mechanical way of doing things. The human touch is lost completely. Now, how do we bring in that human touch? We have been experimenting with this for last 25 years. What we do is we hold early morning sessions after some yoga, some meditation, so that the mind becomes clear. And then we start off by discussing these, statements from famous thought leaders of different civilizations. For example, let us say, there was this Francis Assisi, the Italian saint philosopher, very famous from the 12th century. He said, start by doing what is necessary and then do what is important. And then you will find you are doing the impossible. What a wonderful statement. But then we have to start by doing what is necessary. Start. We don't even start. We are stuck with our insecurities. We are stuck with our systems of living. We don't want to go out of our comfort zones. Even we know that these are not the right ways. We are stuck with our own traditional ways of doing things. We have to start somewhere. We have to connect to a purpose. almost all civilizations in the world, and I'm talking of the Greek civilization, I'm talking of the Chinese civilization, I'm talking of the Indian civilization, they talked about having a purpose in life. A life without purpose is meaningless. This famous Indian saint philosopher called Vivekananda, he said, death is better than a vegetating, ignorant life. A vegetating, ignorant life is just a way of saying things. What is this life? We're just living along, just doing, just tomorrow, just eating something, going somewhere, going to sleep, getting old, getting ill, and then just passing away. There's a purpose in life. Let us try and discover that purpose. The civilizations have taught that purpose. The Indian civilization has taught us, for example, that our life is divine. We can connect to the larger purpose of existence, of evolution itself. We can connect to that larger purpose. We have to grow in consciousness. We have to identify ourselves. We have to really understand that we are not just this physical being. We are this mental being also. We are this emotional being also. And there's a, behind all this physical, emotional, and mental self, there's a deeper self inside. When we connect to our deeper self, our mind becomes very calm. We are able to take the right decisions. These are aspects of living that once we are into a very happy state, seemingly happy state, going to the pub, having some nice drink, that is a limited way of understanding life. True understanding of life has a deeper component. Once we go deeper, we see that life has so many aspects, and we have not really explored the deeper aspects of life. Once we do that, it gives us a huge, immense joy in understanding what we really are. And when we connect to the other person from the deeper aspect, that is what creates new trusting relationships. It creates joy in relationships. And we have to move in that direction. And it is possible. As human beings, it is possible to do it. It just needs an understanding, somebody to talk about it, somebody to reflect on. It is not something that can be mechanically, transmitted. It is something to be reflected. This is something what collective reflection is all about. We have to go into that mode of learning gradually. It is not about monetary affairs. It is not about material wealth. Life is much deeper. When we connect to that deeper source, it gives a different meaning altogether. So this was about collective reflection. Once we do that, the results are absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Believe me, this is an understatement of being absolutely amazing. Because when a person starts thinking about one's own life from a deeper aspect, it really brings in very beautiful transformations. Real transformations. The next slide will show you some of them. This is how we sit together, in a circle. We start discussing. We introduce a subject. Everyone speaks about it. Everyone we all are free to speak about it, whatever we like. Everybody can challenge everyone. But, that goes round. It has to be facilitated. Again, it has to be facilitated. Now, this is a student who came to us from Norway. I'm just taking one example out of thousands. This one student, her name is Beata. I hope I'm pronouncing it well. So this person, Beata Olsen, she came to us, I think, way back in 2006. So after this collective reflection statement sessions, this is the statement that she's making. Please read through the statement. It is a beautiful statement. She says, it feels like we are thinking too much about the materialistic things. that we are busy thinking about how people look at us, about being perfect, having perfect children, the best education, the best job, earning most money, and so on. This is something that she wrote. And then she writes, we have to change our whole mindsets. And she says, people in general have to learn how to be more sensitive to small things in life. They have to learn to calm their minds. We were so proud and happy that she understood that is the real message of change. That is what is the whole aspect of facilitation. That is the whole way of connecting at a human level. And this makes the difference. It creates the magic, if you can call it magic. It creates the magic. And it can be done. It can be done on a scale. Let's go to another statement by another person. Next slide, please. So see again, we are sitting in a circle, talking about things. We are reflecting together. There's nobody giving a speech here. A facilitator is just introducing a subject, and then everybody talks about it. And let's do that on a large scale in Finland and UK. The process of collective reflection, reflecting together. A subject can be picked by you yourself, whatever that subject be. Now, this person who I like to read the statement again from this person. His name is Ram Vilas. He's a senior government functionary. He works with people. He's a government officer. And a government officer in India means the person has power. Person is arrogant sometimes. And very often, sometimes the person is corrupt also. But then see the transmission in his way of thinking. And this is a written statement given by him at the end of a program. And he says, and now I quote, I would like such a training to be imparted to all development officers. I've learned a lot for my own self, and I've perhaps freed myself from alcohol, smoking, and tobacco. These are very small things, but when a person starts thinking about a different way of living, all these things become very minor. This 6 days program has brought earth to sky difference in my thinking. My mind and heart is feeling relaxed. I feel like I am reborn. This is the ultimate. It's all about reflecting. It's all about reflecting from a deeper sense, from a deeper understanding of life. And it's about facilitating that reflection. And it happens. And this is what leads to change. It's what brings about strength in communities. It leads to growth in consciousness. Can we have another slide?
Varun,
yes.
We have to move to the next show soon.
Yes, this is maybe the last slide.
Okay.
So why don't you read this through instead of me? Marcus, can you read this through?
This course has made me think about myself, how I act, how I talk, and my actions. From now on, it will be very important for me to be sincere, real, and truthful to my values and my beliefs, and I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. I will let my values be reflected in my actions.
This is Renate. She is again from Norway.
And the emphasis on the development from within concept is just what I needed most, having been exposed to development work for a couple of years now. Development and social change without focus on issues that affect you as a person within is useless. From Kavanda.
Thank you. So I would like to end my statement here saying that the citizens have a role here. Let us not talk about them. I'd like to invite Pete Richmond, Alastair, can you please come in and suggest what can we do as citizens to take this movement forward it needs to be taken forward on a large scale. We have this whole humanity waiting. We have to bring back the human touch, connect to people who need, and it works. We have seen that it works. It works on a large scale. Alistair or Pete, please come in now. Please, how can we take this forward? Your views now, please.
Hi everyone. I think a very big question. Can't really take it all. Other than trying to just use this as for some of us, an introduction to the work of Manavidaya. I think the key message for Varun has been given is actually the importance of the facilitator, both in terms of what happens externally in communities, but what happens for the person individually. You can't sum that up in 2 minutes, so it's important about trying to keep a collective, people being in touch through platforms like this. There's going to be more on the Citizens Network from Manavidaya, so please keep linked to it. I don't know if you have anything to add, Alistair.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, obviously this has been more about sharing the information about the history and a bit about the process. We're only going to have half an hour, but on Thursday at 1:30 p.m. We're going to have, and it's going to be much more of a conversation then. It's going to be about, people can obviously come back to this and look over Varun's work and some of the learning and bring their questions. And very much this is about bringing this thinking, this knowledge to the rest of the world. What will it take for people to respect the development, the grassroots development in these countries and translate that in a way that makes sense to other parts of the world, so that we can build on this very, very important work, this really fundamental change from within, and transfer it to communities, both poor, both rural, both urban, in Europe, in America, throughout the rest of the world. And so if anybody can join us at half past 1 UK time on Thursday. If you can't join us, you can obviously watch it later. But one of the things I would say is, if anything that you've heard today spurs you on to connect, then please get in touch with Varun, with myself. Look up People-Based Development, look up Manavidaya. If you can please like us on Facebook, on YouTube, you can find us, and try and spread the word a little bit. And then let's find a way to connect. We need to really follow up on these discussions and find ways that you would want to connect. So I'd really like to hear if anybody, we're probably running out of time, but if anybody's got any final thoughts themselves about what they've heard.
And we continue with Varun also on Saturday on No Labels, No Walls, plus We Are One Festival. So please join in on Saturday. I have a surprise. Everybody, I will unmute you all because it's Varun's birthday. So let's sing together to happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Marcus. Yes, it is a birthday. Yes.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Varun. Happy birthday to you, Mr. Varun.
Thank you so much.